This year has been a massive year for fighters getting undeserved title shots. It's also the year that the UFC merged with the WWE to form that new group, TKO. It's also the year that Bellator was absorbed by the PFL. And with all these moving parts, I think I can see a storm brewing on the horizon for the UFC, and I'm going to explain it to you in today's video. Something that I call the Ultimate Casual Championship, and I think it's the direction that the UFC could head into if they don't stop making the mistakes that they've made this year while allowing their competitors to get the wins that they have been getting this year. It's something that I wanted to make as soon as Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera was made, but we rolled on with the usual media circus that is the UFC every single week, and this seems like a good a time as any to talk about it. Plus, one of you, the commenters, reminded me about it in yesterday's talk that we were having. So I'm gonna respect your time and get right into it. My theory is called the Ultimate Casual Championships. And what is the Ultimate Casual Championships? It's the future that I can see for the UFC, and it's soon. It's within like the next 5 years, 2 or 3 years, if they don't watch themselves with all the mistakes that they made this year. Firstly, if you think that the UFC is too big to fail, that a company that is this popular with all this fans cannot have them all turn on them, then you, my friend, were not paying attention to like the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones. Yeah, you weren't paying attention to the Star Wars franchise. You weren't paying attention to the MCU. Yeah, like how many fans do the Patriots have this year compared to how many they had in 2017 or whenever that amazing run was? I don't know, mate. I don't really follow American football. Like, what's the deal with all the padding and protection? Like, tackle each other like men. Don't you know that rugby is the best base for MMA? Anyway, my point is that brands are fickle things, and the UFC is a brand, and it's a brand based on being the gold standard of MMA around the world. That's how it's being sold to us. But what it really is a sports entertainment company. And this year it took its biggest step ever over the line into the entertainment side. It has become so clear. It's always been clear, but it's never been more clear now that to get a title shot purely depends on how many pay-per-views that you're projected to sell rather than how many wins you actually have on your belt. Like, why was Aljamain Sterling not offered the rematch against Sean O'Malley? Why has Merab Dvalishvili never offered the match against Sean O'Malley? It's only because the only loss on Dana White's brand new toy, Sean O'Malley, is Marlon Vera, and it's the best story to tell. So that is why he's getting the title shot. Why was Colby given a title shot instead of Bilal Muhammad? Why isn't John Jones being stripped? The joke at heavyweight is the biggest example ever of we are just here for pay-per-views now. The rankings literally mean nothing. There are many examples that we have in the UFC. It just seems they seem to be getting louder and louder this year. And the discussion just is purely based around who can sell the most title shots. Now, there is a new dog in the yard, yeah, the PFL, and it's the PFL in 2024. I know it's been around for a while, but this is going to be different. The PFL now in 2024. There's always been a premier organization, an A side and a B side. You know, there's always been UFC and Pride, or UFC and Strikeforce, or UFC and Bellator. There's always been the UFC versus the others, the B side. And really the others were just doing whatever the UFC was doing with slightly different rules, but it was just the same matchmaking system, really. Coming up, this is where things are going to start looking different, okay? And it's going to be very, very stark next year, and the stark differences are going to become more and more exaggerated. You see, next year, the PFL are going to have Francis Ngannou and Jake Paul, and the media eyes are going to be on them as they start to run through this new season with Bellator fighters in it, with Francis in it, with Jake Paul in it, and it's going to make a lot more media headlines. There's only so much bandwidth and information that us, the consumers, can consume when there's PFL, One Championship, Bellator, and UFC all running in any given media cycle. But starting next year, it is really just going to be the UFC and the PFL, and their media cycles are going to run side by side. And the PFL have a merit merit-based system. They've always had that, that's what it's been based around, but they've never had this much media attention. And the more that the UFC go off a hype-based system rather than a merit-based system, the starker the difference is going to become between the two of them. And all it will take is a few banger fights in the PFL, a few amazing moments, some well-told stories. And this is the part that the PFL has always missed out on. If they can build interest in that merit-based system, build more hype around the fighters in that system, they can create some real conflict. And that's what all this yapping is about between the fight cards during the week. It's all about that conflict that's building and how we're going to resolve it. In my mind, there are just a few things that the PFL needs to tweak, and if they do, they will overtake the UFC in popularity. First thing they need to do is get better at telling the story about the PFL season. The PFL season is the hardest competition in MMA. If they can tell that story better, it's where MMA fighters truly go to test themselves over the year to see who is the best and stands on the top of that mountain. There is no more grueling a process than the PFL yearly season. If they can tell that story, that will start to build hype in that story better. Number two is they need to get better at telling the story of the actual fighters themselves. What are the fighters interested in? Who's their Sean Strickland? Who's their Colby Covington? Who's their Tom Aspinall? Who's their Leon Edwards that came up from nothing and became a UFC champion when no one said that he could do it from England? These are stories that we MMA fans know, but we don't know them that well about the PFL fighters. And if they can get better at telling those stories, it makes that yearly competition so much more interesting, as well as being merit-based. Number three thing they need to tweak, they need more blood. Look, this is a violent sport. We are people that are here to watch some violence, as well as the punches and the kicks. We also love the violence. It's what made cage fighting so popular in the first place. And this rule of no elbows in the PFL regular season, it is a complete waste. Look, I understand why they have it. If a fighter gets cut bad, they won't be able to continue on with the rest of the season. But the PFL are trying to make themselves the ultimate fighting competition. The UFC, they're trying to make themselves that. And if a fighter doesn't make it to the end of it because they've accumulated some cuts, then they didn't make it to the end of it because they accumulated some cuts. So cuts and elbows have to be back on the menu. It's part of it. If they don't get into the end of the season because they got cut up above the eyebrow, then you didn't make it. You didn't defend yourself good enough. You're not the best fighter at the end of the year. They need to bring it back in because it's just not MMA without the elbows. And also, bring in knees to a grounded opponent. I keep harping on about it, but bring them in. Why not? Make it the hardest competition out there. Make it as hard as it can get, and then show us the winner of that competition. And anyone who doesn't get through because of a few bad cuts, they go into this conflict pile, which we're going to explain later. It's the PFL's pay-per-view season or pay-per-view events that they're going to be doing. If you don't make it in the regular season, they're already running this side thing, which is going to be their pay-per-views, which are just interesting matchmaking fights. So going forward, if you have a better marketed PFL regular season and you've brought over Bellator fighters and now you're starting this 50-50 pay-per-view structure that you're starting up with Jake Paul, now you've got this bucket that you can end these conflicts in. And if you don't have your regular season, that's when you can copy a bit of the UFC's hype model while keeping that intense meritocracy that you have in your company, PFL. Now picture this, it's 2026 in the PFL and you take the winner of like the lightweight PFL 2024 season and put him against the guy that should have won the 2025 season, but he got knocked out early because of a cut due to elbows. Or the runner-up of the 2025 season at featherweight and he takes on the lightweight winner for a super fight pay-per-view. Now that's similar, the exact same matchmaking that the UFC uses, but you put it on your PFL special events pay-per-view. So each year, the PFL, you have your PFL regular season with like premiership champions, season champion, and then you have your just for fun pay-per-views or conflict resolution events running as well. We call them PFL event champions or whatever name you want to give them. Or you could have monthly pay-per-views, just like the UFC does, with 12 fights on the card, 12 fights in the regular season that are going to sort out the premiership season. and 2 main events on top of it, which are your event champions, your just for fun champions. You could build monthly cards just like that. And then in November, you have your regular PFL Championship season finale, where you're giving away millions of dollars. All of this building over here while the UFC just continues to ignore a merit-based system and slide more and more into hype fights. Eventually, you're going to have a Colby Covington, Leon Edwards moment where the fight is just a dud. Belal Muhammad is sitting on the sidelines crying. Imagine it's 2026 after Jones finally heals from his torn pec and goes back to the gym and puts the muscle back on that he needs to have so he can be a competitive heavyweight, versus Stipe Miocic. 2 old, injured men fighting for a fake belt while Tom Aspinall watches in the crowd. And the PFL puts on a stacked card with a merit-based regular system fights card and then 2 event fights at the top of it. That will not take long for the memes to start flowing, for actual MMA fans to start noticing the difference and to start making jokes, yeah? Like, UFC is for casuals, man. It's already this year. Like, this year, you've got a kid dressed as a clown as a champion. You've got a dude shouting MAGA as loud as he can, dressed as a South Park character. You've got DDP and Israel Adesanya like having this war for Africa. It's already a bit of a circus, isn't it? And all it takes is for the PFL to just tweak a few things and it's like sitting Dricus du Plessis next to Sean Strickland. Boom, the fans will flip. There's going to be a change. Something is going to happen. And the UFC is Call of Duty Black Ops 4. You're just looking at it like, what are you? You are a joke of what you used to be. Right, I've ranted long enough about that, but that is the future that I can see in my head for the UFC if they don't stop putting on these hype fights. And if these hype fights continue to be duds like Colby Leon was, like Jones Stipe is going to be, it's not going to look good. It's not going to look good, and the internet is a harsh and unforgiving place. Trust me. So let me know your thoughts on that down there in the comments. Am I way off with this? Do you sort of see the same future coming? Have you been feeling this sort of bubbling in the background as well? I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this down there in the comments, so do let me hear them. And of course, if you've been enjoying these videos, if I've given you something to think about, a different perspective, or made you laugh, if you're still here this deep into the video, maybe you could say thank you by hitting that subscribe button down there. Every single subscriber matters so much to small creators like myself. And I will see you all in the next video.